And thank you for joining this month's Worksoft webinar on Connective RPA. We are pleased to have Shail Chiara and Chris Kraus with us today. An accomplished exec leader and thought leader, Shail has served in C-suite roles for 3 leading automation companies in the market and is a leading thought leader in intelligent automation and artificial intelligence. Chris leads product management for Worksoft, a testing visionary with deep expertise in test automation tools and best practices for both custom and packaged apps. Chris has helped progressive enterprises transform their testing organizations and become more competitive through the adoption of agile testing best practices and automation solutions. Today, they will be discussing how Worksoft's new Connective RPA is different by design.
Thank you, Alicia. Today on our Connective RPA Different by Design webinar, we're going to discuss a handful of interesting things. First off, Shail's going to kick off the state of the RPA market and explain some of the common challenges that he's seen across the industry with his consulting and his different experiences. And then I will introduce Worksoft Connective Automation, and then I'll explain why Connective Automation is different by design, some of the challenges to resilience, and how our object action framework works to make our difference, or why it's different, do a demonstration, and wrap up with questions. So to start, I'd like to, big thank you to Shail for coming on and talking to us. And he's going to talk to us about the state of the RPA market and common challenges and kind of different things he's seen in the industry as a thought leader and automation in general. Shail, thank you.
Chris, thank you for having me here. Alicia, thank you for the introduction. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect, perfect. There's clearly a lot of excitement in the market around automation. And RPA has been talked about the most, and as a front seat driver of that effort, I'm really excited to see that. And automation as a whole is now much broader and comprises of a whole set of technologies. Gartner, for example, talks about RPA revenue reaching nearly $2 billion in 2021. This is a conservative estimate. If you look at other research firms out there, they're projecting anywhere between $4 and $4.5 billion in 2021. To give you some context, the revenues in the RPA market are likely to reach about a 1 to 1.2 billion by the end of this year, COVID adjusted, and that's just software revenue. So what's driving all of this? There's clearly a growing need for identifying processes and building a pipeline, and a need for process automation. The recent survey by HFS Research that identified 54% plan to increase investments in process automation as their globally distributed businesses navigate the pandemic and focus more on differentiation and business resilience. About 3/4 of those surveyed by Forrester say that they're looking for an integrated platform, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Inherently more scalable test automation integrated with process mining and RPA as a native automation solution for organizations really helps address the total cost of ownership and the return on investment challenge that exists in the market, which I'll talk about at a later point. The automation thrives in organizations where it's deemed to be strategic and requires a breakdown of silos and inherent collaboration between business and IT. Research is also showing that cross-functional assets are king. You want to build it once and you want to use it over and over again. So the reusability aspect of automation is clearly distinct and important to customers. Scale is one of the Achilles heel. It's often, in my opinion, a misused word in the automation landscape. It's not about the number of bots, but rather synergies between the various automation elements like testing automation or process mining, RPA, analytics, AI capabilities. And this goes back to the point I made earlier about about 3/4, or to be precise, 72% of those interviewed said that they preferred an integrated platform. So while automation is growing, it is often fragmented, and the difference between scale and fail comes down to 2 things. How strategic is automation to your organization, and how integrated is the solution that you're using for automation? And while there's a lot of excitement around RPA as one of the tools of automation, there are some challenges. So if we can go to the next slide, these are some of the challenges that have been highlighted by Forrester and Gartner. You know, scale continues to be a big challenge. I mentioned that earlier. You know, one function of scale is adoption itself. And if you look at the market today with approximately 15,000 customers across the market in RPA, 80% of those customers have less than 10 robots. That's not necessarily a measure of scale, but it's a measure of adoption. And the metrics around scale vary between various different organizations. There are always hidden costs of automation in place, often infrastructure, technical talent to create a COE, which is in strong demand in the market, driving cultural transformation. All of these costs could add up to more than the license cost of the bots themselves. Bots break. You know, bot fragility is a challenge. Those of you who have a COE or who have embarked on an automation journey will see that bots break due to infrastructure issues, software reliability, application UI, data changes, and the impact is not minimal, right? The impact of bot failures caused by these changes in the underlying applications can often take more than a day to fix, to identify where the process went wrong, where the discrepancy occurred, to be able to change the code that applies to these bots. There are core capabilities required in RPA. For example, low-code capabilities to build automation scripts, integration with other enterprise applications, whether you're using a legacy system or a more modern system, orchestration and administration that includes configuration, monitoring, security. These are critical core elements required within RPA, and you're starting to see vendors build those in more and more so than before. Strong pipeline, I mentioned that on the earlier slide. A strong pipeline is critically essential when embarking on an automation program. It requires candidate processes to be identified with intake, assessment, prioritization of the processes, ideally for up to 12 to 18 months ahead of when you start your automation program. You need a pipeline that is strong, led by the COE in a federated model or by the business unit in a distributed model. And this is where process mining can be a huge help. Lastly, when you look at automation landscape of process mining, testing, RPA, AI, analytics, IBPMS, iPaaS, and more, low code included, integrating these multiple solutions and seamlessly orchestrating them is a challenge for many organizations. It reduces their ROI, it increases their technical debt. You know, that said, there are connective platforms that are emerging in the market, and customers are starting to pay attention to them and starting to adopt these platforms as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Cool, thanks, Shail. So I think it's interesting how you separated the concept of scale versus adoption. I think that's kind of interesting to think about, because scale is lots of things working together, and a lot of times we think very myopically about, you know, like adoption. How many robots do I have versus how well are we working together? How much value are we getting to get the scale itself? So great perspective. So hello, this is Chris Kraus again. And so who is Worksoft? Well, Worksoft provides the only connective automation platform for automating the full lifecycle of a business process from discovery to testing and RPA. So we like to think about how these things work together in a single platform to give you more return on investment and efficiencies. And the world's largest enterprises trust our industry-leading continuous automation, a recognized leader in global system integrators, as the platform of choice for complex package application testing. So we have had a long history of working with integrating complex end-to-end processes across your ERP packages and things like that. And we do focus really on intelligent automation, process optimization, and how can you improve cost and get some business analytics on top of that. So to speak to our heritage, a lot of people think of us as SAP testing, right? And which we've done for years, right? We've got over 15 years of testing there, and we were the first person to be ECAT certified and Solman 7.1 certified, and obviously we're Solman 7.2, and we'll do the new Cloud ALM certifications. And what we find is when we looked at big companies who use SAP, not everything is SAP, but they'll say every transaction goes through SAP. It may start from a mobile app, maybe a Salesforce.com, and then go into SAP and then out to other systems like Manhattan and mainframes and custom apps. And so the great thing about working with customers who have SAP is they have all sorts of different workflows and lots of different enterprise applications integrated together. The other thing is they're across all sorts of industries, telco, utilities, manufacturing, technology, public sector, healthcare, and energy. So what we find is it's a great place to have a knowledge base because SAP runs, most of the world's business, and they'll tell you that at their conference, and it's lots of different industries at that. So when I speak of the connective automation platform, so what is it? It is the concept of process intelligence. So how can we figure out what your processes are? And then how can we build automation? And in some use cases, you can use that automation for testing. In other cases, you can use that for RPA. So in this webinar, since we're talking about connective RPA, I want to kind of focus on that concept of how does process intelligence to automation move to RPA? And so one thing that we can figure out is, do your processes match how things are being done in production? So we want to understand how our business users running the business so that when we build the automation, we're building those things to match. This is helpful for testing and it's helpful for RPA. Now, the interesting thing is because we're doing this in testing first, we see breaking changes, right? By living in tests, we're on the tip of breaking changes, so we understand that our automation has to be very resilient to change. The other thing is we know which automations are used for RPA, so we have a leading indicator. Will something break in production? Did someone do an upgrade of, say, SuccessFactors or Manhattan Associates or Salesforce.com? And will those changes that we're seeing in pre-production break things in the RPA? So we have a nice leading indicator of that. And the last thing is, it really is important to realize that your process documentation you get from the users, is it actually accurate enough for successful RPA? Because we hear that's a big challenge in actually operationalizing and getting to scale with RPA. Can you get in a room and a whiteboard and have the business person draw the process and then tell you all the applications they enter data into and how they work at their desktop level? Well, probably not. And if you do, it's lots of screen sharing and cutting and pasting and that, and it's just not very efficient. So our process intelligence really helps with that. We've always done deep capture for test automation. We've extended that to actually do process mining and task mining at the desktop level. Our automation platform is code-free. So what that means is we can actually build processes that run in test and production, and it is about 3 times faster than actually coding them out. And it really does help testers focus on exceptions and increasing quality. And then the other thing is when we think about scale, if we're doing a good job of describing the processes, say process task mining, what they're doing on the desktop, process intelligence or process mining, say, how are your sales orders moving through the system? Where are inefficiencies in getting that overall, order to cash process in place? Well, that's going to help us figure out what's the best place to apply RPA, and then we can actually use our skills that we already have from Certify to build this also. So we don't have to start from scratch. Now, the thing is, we did build a new orchestrator for this. So we really looked at what's the security or the audit workflows and compliance required for RPA. So we actually introduced a new orchestrator product to solve that problem for RPA. Because automation isn't enough and process intelligence isn't enough. We need to have that third component. So when we think about our Codeless platform, why is it important? Because people struggle when they have multiple tools. So Shell mentioned people like to have a single platform where the tools are integrated together so they give a lower cost of ownership and it's easier to work. And what does the Connective platform do? Well, it really does cohesively connect and optimize the pre-production, production, and the maintenance efforts of keeping your automation running and secure. And then the advantages are that we actually have deep application knowledge. We understand how SAP works and Salesforce and SuccessFactors and all those applications, and like mainframes and all those back office systems that still run your business. So this allows us to have high reusability, shorter time to scale, and we are codeless and secure. So the webinar was, connective automation, different by design. So what does that actually mean? So we really do feel you're going to expedite your return on investment because we're in a code-free platform and you're building your RPA based on a knowledge you have an understanding of. You know how to use Certify. You know how to use our discovery technologies to figure out what the processes are. And because our legacy was in testing, we understand bot fragility. We've always lived on the tip of change at the UI perspective. That's just mathematical. And we live in the tip of change because we're always thinking about releases and new things happening. And people have moved from waterfall to agile, so we have lots of releases, say every 2 or 4 weeks. And so our automation has always been focused on removing that fragility. And then as accelerated scale, how can we move these workflows in place and get lots of robotic processes, but then get them running in a reliable way? So always been big on adapting to change, and we've ensured that we have lots of compliance and auditing built into the new orchestrator. So you can have peace of mind over who's building the bots, who's monitoring them, and when you have to iterate on them, what's there. And obviously our deep expertise in working with desktop applications is huge. So Connective Automation is a combination of Certify as the automation engine and Business Capture to include business process for discovery, and the new orchestrator provides the workflow, the digital workers, and scheduling of work and securing across the assets. So we've implemented the concept of digital workers. So think about, I have a digital coworker that I want to hand tasks to. Maybe it's send an Excel spreadsheet to enter data. Maybe you want it to go validate after a change happened in the system that all the things are working correctly. So we do see, and we've patterned it as digital workers are definitely complements to the humans, and take away those menial tasks so humans can do more important things. Our customers have experienced this. So we have customers who have been starting to use Certify in robotic processes for years. People like Graybar, Discovery, CHEP, Applied Materials, they've been doing this for quite a long time. And so what they found is by starting the beginning of the life cycle of a project with one solution, so that can handle your discovery, your automation, and RPAs, you actually get a lot more value. And so the whole concept of what's the difference between scale and adoption itself. So how are customers actually realizing tangible benefits? So some people are optimizing SAP operations. So they've built robotic processes that say, get a message from ServiceNow, their ticketing system says, I need a printer set up in a system. I need my password reset, things like that. So they've actually worked with actually automating operations and use robotic processes there. Huge savings. This customer said in the first year that $179,000 of savings. Accenture really focus on manual efforts. So when they do month-end close, and you have to close your general ledger accounts and reopen them, or maybe you get emails of your orders in a fax format, and those things need to be saved off into file systems. Or when you set up a new account and a new project, a new customer, usually it's not just entering data on one screen. You have to go to multiple applications and multiple parts of the application to enter that data. So they've actually figured out they're saving over 1,200 hours of manual effort by using robotic processes to do just that, all that entry. And the last use case is really neat with Cardinal Healthcare. How could they actually help speed their agile deployments? Because if you think about an agile, if we do quarterly increments, you're going to have a lot of big master data set up and things that happen on a quarterly basis. So customers need to work through how do they set up their bill of materials, how to do their mass configurations of the packages. If you make pricing changes, it goes into 3 or 4 systems. You make packaging changes. So they really focus on their robotic processes to aid in their agile delivery. So they're updating the materials and production systems to deploy their new workflows. And so they found it was really helpful because they were developing multi-skilled systems or people. So amazing use cases, and these are probably things you should be thinking, hey, we do those things, and there's probably some entry-level things. Maybe there's 5 processes you can come up with that, like, hey, these are things that we face today. Now, the concept being code-free, it's something we always talk about, and we take for granted at Worksoft because quite literally we couldn't put code in an editor if we wanted to because we've always been code-free. That is the core premise of how we work. And what we found is it does accelerate your ability to build more robotic processes. But the key is, because of the way we do that, and we have a centralized sharing of objects and identifications of things, we actually find our maintenance is lower. So we find people are spending less time maintaining robotic processes, and they keep adding and building more robotic processes. So over time, you'll see that your ability to have more adoption of robots will get larger, and we feel it's very highly correlated to the fact that we're not spending a lot of time fixing them. We're very resilient to change. And I'll discuss a little bit more of this in a couple more slides to give you some details around how that works. The other thing is, when you think about your return on investment, people are getting 3x because it's a combination of things. Am I spending my human resources fixing robotic processes and nursing them along so they run? Or am I actually having them run and starting to scale larger? So remember, robotic processes that run once aren't worth a lot of value. Robotic processes that run 10,000 times without maintenance are going to give you a much higher ROI. So that blue line arcing up is showing up how, when you have stable robots and you're getting more and more runs over time, your overall return on investment is higher. If you're spending a lot of time maintaining your robots, that red line is showing you're going to kind of plateau because you're going to get to a point in which you're spending as much time fixing robotic processes as you are running them. And that really hampers your ability to get value on top of that. So specifically, how do we handle this resilience to change and mitigate bot fragility? So Worksoft's patented object action framework is how we've actually responded to dynamic change for years. So if you think about in 1999 when we started, the whole concept of how do you identify objects and model patterns for those objects and put them in a framework so they're reusable. And the idea is each robotic process references an identifier which says this is a say in a timesheet system, this is my submit timesheet button, this is my number of hours, this is my calendar control. And say in web pages, when those things change, like calendar controls, it breaks everything, and you have to go back and fix individual processes manually. But in our case, we dynamically reference them. And so if we make a change to, say, a control on the page, we fix it once and everybody gets it because we have a centralized object repository. And this really does minimize your effort for automating, okay? So you do get more resilience because we're handling change management better. And the core is we have always worked in the user interface with Worksoft. We've always been in testing historically, so we're in the point of the most change. There's 2 things that you realize, because you're working in tests, the point of testing weekly and daily and monthly and quarterly is because things are changing. And the UI is the thing that changes the most. So we've done a really good job of identifying when there's new versions of applications, how do we adapt to them dynamically? Sometimes it's done automatically, other times we actually can give a little hint. And then for each of our interfaces, whether it's our image objects, which is how we do image recognition in OCR, whether it's our NetUI, our Java, our SAP, our Oracle Forms, or of course the HTML interface that people know and love, we have different AI routines that actually figure out how to identify the objects and find them in a non-breaking way. So we never use something as simple as XPath. And so the key is we actually decouple those. So how is that different than other things? So if we speak to bot fragility, scripting is like using a paper map. Paper maps work, right? I mean, God knows I've traveled all over Europe and the US with a paper map, but they're not really connected to updates. So every once in a while, you're going to need a new map to figure out where you are and where you're going. But they definitely work. The problem is they're not adaptive, right? They're not adaptive in real time when something changes. If there's road construction, a paper map's not going to suggest how you reroute them. You'll have to pull over and look at the map and say, okay, how can I reroute this? Because now I'm in the middle of a problem itself. Now, if you think about that's how scripts work, when we think about object actions in Worksoft, we're like a connected GPS. There's a central location for traffic feedback on your GPS system. So the idea is you're getting real-time feedback. And it could be through the satellites, it could be through Waze, it could be lots of things. But the point is, if you have real-time feedback as to where things are going wrong, instead of being on the left, on the road, on the side of the mountain, it may say, hey, just go straight through the middle of the desert. There's no one there. It may be a longer, more scenic route, but you're going to get there faster than the more direct route through the mountain, right? So scripting is like a paper map. It's not going to adapt. You have to keep republishing and making changes, and you're not going to see those things that happen in real time. Because we're code-free in the object action framework, we actually can identify everybody uses the same object references, the same identifiers. We make one change, and it's replicated to everybody. Kind of the same way GPS updates send information to everyone. So how does this literally work? So when you're using Capture or you're using Live Touch and you're on a web page, and as you're identifying different elements, we're basically creating a library. And we say, I have an application. Applications have windows. I have multi-leave windows. I've checked my pay stub windows. And each one of those windows has different objects, which is like, what's my leave? How do I post the leave? How do I enter my selected dates in the calendar controls? And they have actions like input, verify, click exists. So the first person who does the capture, what happens is we identify and start building out this library. The second thing is when the next person and the next person and the next person actually do their captures, and maybe they traverse the same screen in different workflows, or maybe the same workflows, we're going to automatically align them to the same objects. So every person who touched the leave type field is not going to save the location of it in their test case. They're going to save a reference to the leave type, and the leave type knows how to input the data, to verify the text. So we're actually building out a cross-reference automatically. And so the nice thing is we're not embedding that data into every process. So if we had to make a change, I don't have to change 4 processes. The idea is I want to change 1. So literally, maybe if a field changes, maybe it's the leave type, or the operational notes, if that field changes, what we do is we go into the application and that window, and we can see here's the object. We can see it's referenced by 4 different processes. We heal that one object, and then it solves it for all the processes. You don't have to go to each process individually and fix them. So we have a cross-reference, and this object healing is really important because when things change, you don't want to spend all your time working through hundreds of changes. You want to fix it once and have everybody inherit it. So that's how we handle this whole concept of making sure our bots aren't fragile. We do a lot of things to make sure we identify things correctly. Obviously, our long history with SAP and Salesforce and those things, we're really good at it. But if it does change, maybe they make a physical change to a calendar control or the way the drop-down list works, it's one change and everybody inherits it. So I mentioned at the very beginning, we started with writing a new orchestrator. So we actually wrote a new workflow for RPA because we see it's different than test automation, the way you deploy them and the way you want to do security. So we've actually implemented a workflow. So we have you create a project, you go through your discovery phase of what should we create, and then you actually do the creation or the authoring of the model. You go back to approval and you publish. And all along the way, we have an audit trail to show which actors and who approved or rejected and worked along the way. So we have a nice audit trail of how the robotic process got in production. Obviously, security groups are very important. So for each step in the workflow, you have individuals who are secured to those things so they can see them and have actions, like people doing discovery, say Chris Discover can use capture and upload and describe the process. Chris Creator actually authors it, but then we pass back for approval to Chris Discover to approve it. Now, these are not the only abilities to secure. On the right, there's lots more roles. So it's very finite. So it's like, can you actually see the digital worker logs? Can you see the execution analysis? Are you in production operations and can you deploy this? So we've looked at how do we make sure the workflow is good and a very auditable security level, because we've got great automation to build on. The other thing we did is we re-looked at how do we digital workers. We've been running tests, lights out overnight for years, and we've scaled to people running 200-300 tests in parallel at night. So we've got a lot of learnings there. But we took this as an opportunity to re-architect and take all the learnings we have, and when we've built our new digital workers, we've taken in those 10 years of experience. And so the idea is your client logins to your Windows boxes. We log in each time and log out, so you have a very strict security control. No one's leaving Windows machines logged in all the time that can be tampered with in a data center. I mean, it doesn't help that the video feed someone got on a console to the digital worker that's up all the time. You need to log in and log out in the headless way, right? We've integrated to CyberArk so that you can keep your credentials there for that deeper auditing. And what happens is when you set up a digital worker, you'll have two styles of digital workers. One is a job queue worker. So this digital worker can run multiple processes and it iterates through them with a pacing. Or it can be a manual worker. And this is ones where maybe you want the business to manually kick off or production operations to kick off a process because they've done an upgrade or they need something done specifically. So the digital workers are nice. They can run multiple processes and they can be scheduled or they can be kicked off manually. So what I want to do is show you a demonstration of how this works. Now, at the Connective Automation Summit, which happened last month, I went very deep into how the automated discovery and how we run processes. So everything on the first two steps, if you go to our website, you can watch a video of that. There's actually a 15-minute demo of how we do process discovery, how the documentation workflow works. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to step into the editing to the execution, that next step in the workflow. So how do we handle bot fragility? How do we handle when things change? Okay, so here I have the Orchestrator homepage. So what we see is we can see a list of the projects, the digital workers, and then what's run today. I can see that I have a robotic process personal leave. It's in the discovery. And if I step backwards, you'll see that whole screen that shows you. We have a name, a description, and I've associated different users with different parts of the process. So a separation of duties itself. A capture has been uploaded and a documentation has been automatically generated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this off to automation so we can see what does it look like for someone to take the capture file and certify and actually build the robotic process. How do we refactor this? And so realize as I span across there, there's different roles and different audit logs will be entered as these things happen. So I can see I don't have a robotic model here. My RPA model is empty. So I'm going to go to Certify. And with Certify 12, we implemented some new features. So you'll see we can import a process. There's the normal stuff. We also have this one called Pull It from the Orchestrator. So I am logging in as Chris Creator, the different role, and I'll get to pick my tenant. So now realize the capture files are encrypted. So the encrypted capture file will be sent to Certify. It will know how to decrypt it and turn it into my test steps. Now, this is key. I'm going to go pick the application that I want to put these into. So I put these into the net application. And what happens is I now am going to do the math. We're looking at every data that was input, all the fields, and we're reconciling them to the objects and the actions. So this is the step that does all the goodness. So we have robotic processes that are easy to maintain and manage. So what happens is when we import them, we actually have them assigned and organized for us automatically. No need to do extra scans and things and outside steps. It just happens dynamically for you. I can see I'm in a window time clock report, and I can see there's different objects, leave type, the date, things like that that are entered. I'm on a run. I do have stop on fail set up. So obviously this wouldn't be a great demo if it works the first time. So I'm expecting this to fail. So I'm going to show you how do we actually remediate a change in the object action framework. So what will happen is the certified process starts. It's going to log me in, and it's going to start working through entering data into the application itself. So I've entered the time, the leave, and now it's trying to enter the optional notes, and it failed. So we can see the previous steps have a green check. This one has a red. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do an edit object and say, okay, why did this object fail? The window has a checkbox, the object is question mark. It says I couldn't find this object, so something's changed. So I'll just select it and control click. And what we'll see is it found the object. On that web page, there's an input text field. Yep, it has found a lot of different information about that. And it said, okay, this doesn't work, so let me rebuild it. So there's different AI routines, they're called web optimizations, that go through and figure out how to identify objects. I can see all the available things and what it's picked. I can manually pick something else. At the bottom, I'll see there's an X path, which is probably the worst way to do it, right? But based on your application, Salesforce, SuccessFactors, SAP, Workday, we'll actually have optimizations that understand how to find the fields in a non-brittle way. And so we'll do everything possible to prevent this from happening. But if it does, it's simply a click. And notice I continued running from where I was. I didn't actually have to stop, save, change my process. That happened automatically because I healed that one object. I didn't have to save my process. I resolved the object that was conflicted. So now this input field that I fixed is there. I can see it's on the time clock window. And if I go actually and I look at the object details, it'll tell me how it found it in the attribute string. But more interesting is I can go look at this in the library. So what we do is we organize these into windows, and windows have objects. So if I come to my application for net, I have my time clock window, which is my time clock report, as the optional notes. And I'll use process usage. And what this does is it will tell me whenever I have a process that references that. And some of these are not in the same folders, they're scattered across my library. But the idea is I know all the processes that would have break if that didn't work. I can actually look at them and see where the step is. And so I did one fix by resolving the object, and everybody inherited the change. So it is really a different mode for making sure my processes work fast and efficiently. I'm not having to deal with going to multiple scripts and doing greps and finding, do I have lots of code? Let it go to get, check everything out on my desktop, pushing it back. Because we're code free, it solves that. Now I'm going to basically export this model. So this process is being exported and encrypted and saved in the orchestrator. And what this will do is allow me to take it to the next step of the workflow. So if I come over and if I refresh, we'll see my HR paid leave model is now uploaded, and I have my model that can be run. So at this point, I have two things. I can request approval and send it to business to look at, or maybe I didn't have the right information. I could actually reject it back and say, hey, discovery person, give me more info. But for this demo, I'm going to take it forward and actually say, hey, business, I need you to look at this. So we move to the next stage in the workflow. And this goes back to the business user, and we want them to actually look at this. And maybe this is Chris Discover is the Discover person and the approver, but we want it to be someone separate from the person authored it, to have separation of command and control. So, in some cases, business person will do execute now. In other cases, they may sit with the developer and watch it run on the desktop and ask questions, which is fine. So we're in the projects. I'm now going to go over to my digital workers, and we'll go watch it run. So we can actually open a spy window. This is an audited event. So I'll see it's waiting for work, and it should pick it up. Yep, now it says running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the spy window, so I can watch it work. So the idea is we want to make it easy enough for business to see the robotic process run, to approve it, and they can be kind of self-sufficient and standalone, or they may sit with the developer and actually do that together, which is fine. And we'll see it's starting to run. So we did a remote desktop login because we don't want to leave these logged in all the time. That's very insecure. What we do is every time we run, we log in with specific credentials. Sometimes different processes need different credentials or different machines. We have a way to separate the digital workers and your actual machines. And then we kick off the automation, and what we'll see is the automation will launch the browser. We'll see it start entering the data, and then it will successfully enter the leave request. So, and now this may run once, this may run 10,000 times a day, just depends on how much data we give it. So the whole core concept here is we want to make it easy for people to understand how to build the process. So what's the discovery? How do we then build the automation on top of it? And then how do we actually allow it to go forward in a secured and audited way? So the user could actually reject it and say, you're missing something, or they can request publish and take it forward. And we do give you a task list every time across there to see what's happening.